Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. And fitting as we roll into the holiday season, here's a little story about gifts. Story 244. Me and my best friend, Samantha, were teens at the mall when everything began. This was back when malls were the place to be, to hang out after school when you were too old for scouts or girls and boys club, and too young for nightclubs. Not that our town had any. It was a pretty small town. The mall in question, the Westminton, had all the usual anchor stores, but we didn't bother with those beyond questionable perfume purchases. A buy-it-for-the-attractive-bottle methodology I still use today when buying wine. In amongst all the normal shops like Yankee Candles and See's Candies was a little metaphysical shop. Now that was our jam. New Age was the rage, and that Pure Mood CD set infomercial was in heavy rotation. And my best friend, Samantha, oh, she was all in. Me, not as much, but you have to admit there's a certain allure to the shiny crystals, sculpted candles, and the sort of fantasy-style dragons that were just everywhere in stores like those, as glittery snow globes, carved out of those aforementioned shiny rocks, and cast in bronze or resin to smile lazily as you shoved an incense stick into their little hands and sent gray ash and smoke drifting over them. I think that kind of activates a little goblin in all of us. The draw of shiny, clacky little trinkets with some potential little secret in them. Does this incense increase luck? Will burning this candle make Tyler Gray notice me? Who knows? Maybe that's why all those little dragons were smiling so slyly. Samantha was prowling this shop for rose quartz. The shop had this hefty orb of it, about the size of a softball, and this was our third return trip to the shop for her to agonize over buying it. On the one hand, it was pricey for our age and general allowance. On the other, though, she was despondent regarding her love life, or lack thereof, and she was sure this was the missing ingredient. Well, I had the money, so while she was distracted by some oils over in the corner, I picked up the ball of gauzy pink stone and bought it for her. It was clear she wanted it, and I wanted my friend to have every advantage in getting her first boyfriend, even if the advantage was just a boost in confidence. Samantha came over just as the register finished printing the receipt. The look on her face when I handed her the ball was perfect. She was elated, but then she insisted she return the favor. She'd finally decided to buy the quartz and so had the money right at hand. I told her that was okay, but she insisted. I think now she'd already been eyeing something for me because without hesitation, she marched to the bookshelves of crystals and picked up a black pyramid, the base of which spanned the palm of her hand. She plunked it down in front of the cashier and told me it was black tourmaline, a stone renowned for its protective qualities and warding. Now I thought she said warts, so I asked, but she corrected me to warding, as in keeping bad stuff from happening to me or people with bad intentions from coming near me. The cashier was nodding along, interjecting that she kept it near her own door to stop intruders, because the rock's properties were just that good at projecting out like a field of back off. I was a teen who lived in her parents' house with a Briggs security system. I wasn't exactly managing a roster of nemeses, but Samantha was so adamant that I just said thank you. I put the paper bag with the surprisingly heavy pyramid into my backpack, and we continued shopping. We had just retrieved our usual, Orange Julius, how I miss thee, when Samantha knocked me with her elbow. I looked to her face, and she flicked her eyes in the direction of a table in the food court. And at that table, a couple of boys. They looked a little older than us, maybe seniors, I guessed, but they were cute. And moreover, they were definitely giving Samantha and I the once-over. Samantha leaned towards me and stage whispered about how that globe of rose quartz was already working. She pulled me along with her to their table to perform the awkward mating dance of disinterested teen flirting. I wasn't entirely sold on it being rocks that brought Samantha the attention. She was a bubbly girl and really pretty anyways. But when a cute guy is smiling at you and appearing to be a little shy about it, it's easy to get carried away. The boys invited us to sit with them. We did while they introduced themselves, Todd and Bryce. Todd was highlight blonde and the more talkative of the two. He kept his eyes on Samantha's as they spoke. I talked more with Bryce. He was darker haired, a little shorter and stockier than Todd, and had a sarcastic sense of humor that I vibed with. It did feel pretty perfect, right down to the guys inviting us to go out to get real food with them later on that night. Maybe Sam was on to something with that rose quartz drawing love her way like a magnet, and I was reaping rewards by proximity like an AoE buff. She said as much when we left, with a plan to meet up later on that night at a little diner out on the other side of town, freshly made. Samantha picked me up that night from my house and drove us there. The little diner was non-franchise and had been out there by the airport forever, but neither of us had ever gone before. It was charming though. Booths, those little jukebox machines by the napkin holder that let you pick golden oldies and the platters that matter. It was just as easygoing as it had been at the mall. Todd was touching Samantha's hands a lot, but gently, flirty. Bryce less so. And in hindsight, I saw his eyes drift to those hands more than a couple of times. But he didn't do or say anything amiss. So in that moment, it all seemed very meet-cute and harmless. After dinner, the boys wanted to go out to the lake. Our town doesn't have much going on, as you might have guessed from the mall comment. But we do have a pretty great lake, and lots of families have boats and stuff to take advantage of it. This was July, right at the height of tourist season. So as we'd followed them in Sam's car, we guessed that there'd be bonfires and lots of people camping in the area. Plus, we were locals. This was our home turf. If any misgivings about following two guys out into the woods were there, we'd rationalize them all away. So when Todd's car reached, but kept driving past the usual couple parking lots, we followed. The multiple lines of cars with out-of-state plates parked on the side of the road dwindled as we drove miles past. We finally saw his blinker hit at a little dirt turnout. We pulled up behind it, and Samantha took a breath like she was going to say something. But then she just shrugged, said something like, "Guess they wanted to be away from all the drunken townies." I remember laughing, agreeing that yeah, that wouldn't be very romantic, and we got out to follow the boys down to the lakeside beach. But as we approached the water, we had to use our phones as flashlights. There were no lights out there, only the barest twinkle of bonfires way down in the shoreline where said tourists camped. That amount of distance between us and the next living people, well, it started to gnaw at me a bit. And before I could say anything, pause a beat and let Samantha notice, sidle up to me so I could whisper to wait. Todd had grabbed her upper arm and jerked her forward. He said something with a laugh, like to hurry up already, be a good sport. But she stumbled forward, pitched by the momentum of him pulling her. Her hand flew out and clawed at a tree for purchase, and she made this little cry of pain. I cried out too, reaching for Sam, but Todd was there. He moved in front of her and pulled his arms completely around her, bear hugging her against him, even as his hands began to move aggressively. I saw the outline of one of them go down the back of her shorts. I heard her gasp, then sort of squeak at him as she tried to push away. But he was just laughing, not letting her go. Then his laughter stopped, and that seeking hand retracted with a shout of pain. He said something like,
"You little slut. What did you do that for?"
I saw Sam's hands. She was a big one for acrylic nails, and in my phone light I could just make out one of the neon green tips was gone. She'd broken her nail, likely on that tree when she'd fallen, and she'd used the jagged edge to jab him, poke or maybe cut him, enough to let her go. She spun away, but as she did, Todd's head snapped to his left. I followed his look, and there was Bryce, standing, hands at his sides, sort of a flat expression on his face. Todd said,
"Dude, what? Stop her."
Bryce's face contorted like he smelled something bad, but he stepped up and bear-hugged around Sam's waist from behind as she tried to scramble past, lifting her off her feet. I tried to yell, but the voice that blurted out, "Stop it. Let her go," was meek, stuttering. It was like a nightmare. I wanted to move, to shout, but I was locked up, frozen in place. Todd's laughter covered my weak voice. He said something like,
"Oh, no, you don't. You've been a little tease all day. It's time to pay up."
He grabbed her again from Bryce's grip, one hand up around her upper arm again, and with his free hand, he slapped her, hard, across the face. Bryce released her immediately, and I saw doubt in his eyes, just the briefest flicker of it, as he said, "Dude, maybe we..." But Todd was mocking him, repeating what he said in this sing-song voice.
"Maybe we..." "Shut up. I'll let you have a turn when I'm done."
Bryce's mouth flattened into a line again. He glanced at me, then down at the ground. I stared at him for a good second, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't know what he'd do if I made a move towards his bro. If I could, my limbs were lead and I couldn't move. But Sam's breath was huffing, a sure sign she was near tears, and I felt frozen. Todd was grabbing at her again, and her voice sounded high-pitched, breathy, as she pleaded with him to stop. Please stop. That hideous laughter sounded almost practiced. Everything about this seemed rote and practiced the way they were acting. My God, I remembered thinking, how many times has he done this? And then he said,
"Scream if you want. No one's gonna save you here."
And that word, scream, those twinkling bonfires, the lake, science class the previous year. We'd been studying radio frequencies. Sound carries over water because it's all RF spectrum, sound, and reflective surfaces serve to bounce it farther. That happens with train tracks and large bodies of water. That brief moment of mundane reality, remembering science class. the hope of those glimmering lights off in the distance, maybe not too distant to hear me, and Todd's snide permission to scream. I felt my chest relax, suck in a huge breath that my lungs hadn't been able to pull in before. I dropped my mouth open and I screamed as hard as I could. And beside me, I felt a rush of something fly past. I remember thinking, bats. I must have startled some bats. But then this thick, bony crunch sounded before me, drew my attention. Then, a wild, keening cry. Todd let go of Samantha. He toppled over, clutching at his leg.
My knee. My goddamn knee. What the?
Amanda! Sam's voice was loud again. She shoved Todd over onto his side, then stopped and grabbed something on the ground. And then she was sprinting, grabbing my hand as she ran past. I chanced only one look back, and I saw Bryce. He was staring after us even as Todd continued to writhe on the ground, commanding him to stop us, help him, do something. We ran all the way to the car, threw ourselves in it, locked it, alternated staring at each other with peering wildly around in the woods. Samantha tossed her phone into the center console. I assumed this was what she'd scrabbled for on the ground, and she started the car, hitting the headlights with movement so frantic she turned on the windshield wipers too. The air conditioning was on full blast, and my cheeks immediately tingled, cold, as the air hit the tears that had been streaming down my face without my noticing. She hit reverse and screeched backwards back onto the road, leveling the headlights of the car at the tree line, just in time to see Bryce emerge. He still had that dark, deadpan expression. He looked at our car, and we stared at him. Then, calmly, eerily calmly for what had just happened, he turned, walked to the car they'd come in. Fearing he was planning to chase us, Sam threw the car into drive and floored it. I stared back in the rearview mirrors, but the lights on Bryce's car never came on that I saw. We were chattering, half mad, just panicked, as Sam drove back towards civilization, just talking over each other a non-stop stream of, I can't, what the hell was that? Just nonsense. She pulled back over in town at the same mall where this story had begun. The parking lot was lit like a football game, with its rows of bright lights. In the light, as she turned to me, I gasped. The side of her face that he'd slapped was bright red, raising like a welt. But she gasped too. Amanda, your eyes. I didn't know what she meant. I'd been crying. Did I have raccoon eyes from my eyeliner? But when I flipped down the sun visor and looked in the little mirror, I saw what she meant. When I'd screamed, I'd done so with such force I'd burst blood vessels throughout my eyes. It left them with a dark red stain like old ketchup spattered over the whites. I turned to her. She'd done the same and was examining her cheek in her sun visor mirror. She looked at me. We breathed, and then a hitching, hysterical laughter cracked out of both of us. Just broke out. The shuddering, too close edge that we now realized we'd been balancing on, that we'd nearly tripped over. The whole encounter had lasted only an hour. I have no idea how long we fell to pieces in that car, alternating between cackling and sobbing. It was as this finally petered out that Samantha dug around in her seat, pulling something out from where she dropped it between her legs. She told me, "Looks like those pitching lessons really paid off," in between her giggles. And she handed me something heavy, triangular, the base covering the expanse of my palm. The pyramid. The black tourmaline pyramid she'd bought for me that day. The one meant to protect, to ward, to save. But how did she? My heartbeat thudded even as Samantha pulled me into a crushing hug, the two of us clinging to each other for life over the shifter knob. Samantha had me stay over at her place that night. We were basically inseparable over the summer months, so neither of our parents minded. And she figured that with some eye drops and some foundation, we could cover the worst of it by the next morning. We couldn't tell anyone, we decided. We were younger, and still in that mindset that by doing something as unforgivably stupid as going on with two boys whose last names we never got, hell, if their first names were even real, into the woods at night, alone, well, we'd be grounded for the rest of our natural lives. And what exactly could the police do with, well, they said their first names were Todd and Bryce. No, never seen them before. No, probably tourists, but one of them's limping. Not much. So we swore on it, and I guess I kept that promise. Until today. And that felt like something final. And final? Final was good. It meant the whole thing was over. No questions asked. Well, except one. When I went back into her bathroom to brush my teeth and examine the damage to my eyes, I brought my backpack with me, and I dug around in it, all the while knowing what I would find. What I wouldn't find, rather. And I didn't. There was still the paper bag that the cashier lady had put it in. But the pyramid, it was gone. But it wasn't gone. It was sitting back in Sam's room where I'd left it, from when she'd handed it to me. That was the thing she'd grabbed off the ground, the thing that had flown past me and smashed a pointy, heavy, black tourmaline pyramid that I hadn't brought with me from the car, let alone thrown with pinpoint accuracy. I still have that pyramid of tourmaline, and I keep it by the door of my house now as instructed. Am I crazy? Maybe, but maybe not. At one point, people were collecting rocks because they glowed, playing with a never-drying silvery liquid because it just looked magical, making dishes and other household products out of them, right up until they began to notice being close to those rocks, eating off plates made of them, taking quicksilver as medication. Well, it was hurting them. Maybe my little rock is protective, does give off an energy of back off, because it's an undiscovered source of some kind of new radiation, and we'll find that out in some far-off year in the future when the scientists get around to studying it. But even then, that still doesn't explain who took it from the backpack in the car and threw it. Who among us doesn't appreciate a nice shiny rock? If you'd like to reach out, email and socials are in the description. Interacting with the like, comment, and subscribe features does something, allegedly. And otherwise, we'll meet again next Tuesday. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.